My views on the Donkey Kong franchise are shorter than the other ones I made so far, because there aren't that many major games in the franchise. In fact, they can be separated into just 4 phases, with the first one being the original trilogy of the 80s. The original game is actually sharing a history with Super Mario, since both characters first appeared in it, and as I said in the Super Mario video, they revolutionized single-screen platformers. Unfortunately, while Mario games went on to become more experimental and expansive, Donkey Kong games stayed within the confines of their genre, and were quickly overshadowed by the hundreds of other platformers that came out soon afterwards. With that said, the second game, Donkey Kong Jr., is an improvement over the first by including climbing that added a new dimension of movement. You weren't only walking and jumping left and right, you were also climbing up and down. Plus, the objective wasn't just to get to the top, there were more than one objectives scattered around the screen. Such simple details offered more variety and made it less repetitive. The third game, on the other hand, was a downgrade, since it wanted to be a vertical shoot-'em-up. Movement was far more limited, since not only you couldn't climb, but also you couldn't even move to the upper side of the screen, meaning half of what you see was unreachable, and only there so you could see the incoming attacks. As for the main goal, it was about shooting bug spray in a gorilla's ass, something you could do just by staying in the middle of the screen, so there wasn't even any incentive to move around unless you were being attacked or you wanted to get more points by shooting at secondary targets. So yeah, it was a far worse game in terms of gameplay, and it also looked completely ridiculous since you were shooting bug spray in a gorilla's ass. A whole decade passed before the Country trilogy was made in the 90s, and what did you know, it's the one most know of and considered to be the best part of the franchise. It's a running thing when it comes to the franchises I covered so far, meaning Sonic, Mario and Crash Bandicoot. The first 3 games that came out in the 90s are the best, and everything before or after cannot match them. This is a lie fueled by nostalgia, since the best games in those franchises came after the 90s. Anyways, the studio that made these games was Rare, and it did a splendid job with the 3D models and the music. In terms of identity, the Rare trilogy stood out from the other franchises by having a lot of acrobatics. Mario was about jumping and flying, Sonic was about running, Crash Bandicoot was about moving with a third-person perspective, and Donkey Kong was all about climbing on vines and being shot out of barrels, you know, like a gorilla in a circus. It was cinematic and bombastic, easily making it very addictive to play. With that said, the first game is very short. I finished it in like 3 days, and there weren't any collectibles for being motivated to replay it. It's the second game that added collectibles for a special boss fight and a new ending, and it's the third game that added enough puzzles that require extensive exploration and experimentation. Unfortunately, none of the collectibles give you an in-game advantage. You never continue to the next stage with a power-up, as you do with Mario, and you never gain a super mode, like in Sonic. Not a deal breaker, but just like it was happening with the early Crash Bandicoot games, you were collecting stuff for completion's sake, not for extra moves. And then, as was the style at the time, they had to make a 3D Donkey Kong that aged badly before you know it, and everyone forgot about it in a couple of years. Although not that different from Super Mario 64, and definitely better than those horrible Sonic Adventure games, it suffers from being bland. Unlike the Country trilogy, it doesn't have an identity for standing out. It's just another 3D platformer that doesn't revolutionize the genre like Super Mario 64 did. It is not very funny like Crash Twinsanity was, and it isn't even that bad so you can point your finger at it and laugh like Sonic Adventure. It's a typical unforgettable game that was made for the sake of the trend at the time, and was then forgotten by everyone. Fuck it, don't bother, moving on. It took a whole decade before they made the 4th and final phase. During the 2000s, the Donkey Kong franchise had been ignored by Nintendo. He was just a character they were adding in casual party games for the heck of it, and even the identity of the Country trilogy lost its specialty when most platformers would let you climb and be shot out of barrels. Even when more games were made, it was only because the new Super Mario Bros. Franchise sparked new interest in classic 2D platformers. It's something you have to accept when it comes to this franchise. Donkey Kong was always running after Mario games. The Country trilogy was made because a Super Mario World was a success. Donkey Kong 64 was made because a Super Mario 64 was a success. And now these games were made because the new Super Mario Bros. Was a success. With that said, these games have everything you loved about the 90s trilogy, refined and improved. Better physics, more variety in the moveset, smaller characters for a wider field vision, beautiful backgrounds, reasonable difficulty curve, and enough collectibles and extra stages to keep you preoccupied for months. These here are the pinnacle of the franchise, and they are also the last major ones since Nintendo completely ignored Donkey Kong once again. The character became a throwaway addition in cheap party games and casual handhelds. They didn't even bother to make a game like Mario Galaxy, which was the next fad. They made Sonic Lost World with the gimmick of small round stages and forgot all about Donkey Kong, even though blasting from one part of the stage to the other is supposed to be his specialty. Shame on you, Nintendo!